Alan, thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 7. If you thought it was almost over, think again. Israel's Prime Minister has vowed to intensify the fight against Hamas in Gaza, declaring that Israel's military campaign is not close to being over. One UN official has told the BBC that the situation in the Al-Aqsa hospital in central Gaza is absolute carnage. Well, we can join now the Gaza director of UNRWA, that's the UN agency for Palestinian refugees, Tom White. Good morning to you, Tom. When we hear Israel's Prime Minister saying it's not over, what is it like for you in southern Gaza and for the people living there?
Well, this morning there have been a series of airstrikes in eastern Rafah. So, as we're talking, we can hear the airstrikes coming into Rafah. I think our most troubling issue we're dealing with right now is that communities in the central part of Gaza, it's known as the middle areas, they've received evacuation orders from the army in the recent days. About 150,000 people live in these communities. Many people have started moving south. Many of them moved to Benghazi, which is, was supposed to be safe. And as no doubt you've reported, over 70 people were killed in an airstrike on Christmas Eve in that location. So the reality is more and more people are being pushed down into the south, into Rafah. So more people into a very small strip of land that cannot support them. And it's quite clear right now that Israeli army is broadening its offensive into this middle area of Gaza.
And once people move, if they move, how possible is it for them to get food, water, shelter?
I've been asked this countless times by people, where do I go? People's first priority is to find somewhere that's safe. Unfortunately, we don't have a good answer because nowhere is safe in Gaza. As I just described, I can just hear another airstrike come into Rafah. Nowhere is safe in Gaza. The other issue for families is, where do they find shelter? Where do they find food and water? In Rafah now, it was originally a population of about 280,000 people. There's over 1 million people in Rafah now, and that number continues to grow. Every street corner has now got people living on the streets, and huge informal camps have been set up on the outskirts of Rafah. In fact, a couple of hundred metres from where I am now, there's about 40,000 people who built very flimsy plastic shelters. And every day for them is a struggle for survival, finding some food and finding some water.
And Tom, what about aid deliveries over the border near to where you are now? There's a report in the Haaretz newspaper, Israel's newspaper, that the deal that has been done between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu is not to stop the attacks, but to increase the amount of humanitarian aid that reaches Gaza. Are you seeing any signs of that?
Nick, at this stage, no, we're not. The reality is that, we're getting in 100 or so trucks a day. We need, and we've needed since the start of the war, over 500 trucks a day of not just humanitarian aid, but also commercial access for foodstuffs and cooking gas. So there's a huge backlog of unmet need within Gaza. And right now, we're not seeing the amount of aid coming into Gaza that is required to support over 2 million people. And to give you a sense of how acute the situation is becoming, a report released this week by the United Nations is saying that 40% of the population now at risk of famine. So the short answer is no, not enough aid is coming into Gaza.
And presumably that desperate hunger means that once the aid comes in, it's quite hard to distribute successfully. I'm looking at some images here of a few days ago in which people were raiding one of the trucks that came through and just eating anything they could find.
Definitely. The sense of desperation in the population means that it's increasingly difficult for us to distribute aid once it gets into Gaza. And a lot of our trucks are, in fact, being looted before they get to the destinations or our distribution points. And we've been warning about this for weeks. If we cannot get enough humanitarian aid in, it will drive a level of insecurity, a breakdown in law and order, which in many cases is just driven by pure desperation, people wanting to feed their families.
Tom White, Gaza Director of UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, speaking to us from Rafah in southern Gaza. Thanks for joining us.